So good morning, everybody. Happy Earth Day. Today's April 22nd. Thanks for joining us. This is the latest Latte and Learn, our fourth Latte and Learn put on by the Green Business Leaders Program at Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling. I'm Jennifer Stefanik, the Green Business Coordinator for the Green Business Leaders Program. And today's focus is all about electric vehicles, or as they're commonly referred to as EVs. So we've got a good group today, and I just kind of wanted to get a sense of who's in the room, who's joined us today. So if you'd like, totally optional, please share your name, your organization, and the role you have within the organization, and maybe just a favorite spring activity, just to kind of get a little bit of networking going on. Let's see, get my screen out of the way. All right, so as I mentioned before, my colleague Kate is on the line here. She's on the Zoom, Kate DeCesare. And if anybody's having any technical difficulties, please just message her if for any reason you are able to, and we can hopefully work through that. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. Please keep your microphones muted until the end of the presentation. We can do some live Q&A. You can also use the chat function as we go, place some questions in there. And feel free to, or at the end, yeah, just go ahead and turn on your mic at the end. You can use the raise your hand function. And we'll do a lot more Q&A at the end. And you can feel free to have your camera on or off during the presentation. I will likely turn mine off just for connectivity. Sometimes having a lot of cameras on can cause a little bit of tech issue, but that's also optional. And for best presentation viewing, you can select the side-by-side mode or dock the video participants off to the side or the bottom of the screen just so you can see the presentation a little better. My email address is shown here on the screen, Jennifer Stefanik at co.washington.org.us. If you'd like to reach out for any questions, follow-up questions, or feedback. And then at the end of the presentation today, for all the registrants, I will be sharing Kelly's presentation and some links to other information that she will be presenting. So keep an eye out for that shortly after the presentation here. And then accessibility and discussion. Today's webinar does have in Spanish interpretation, excuse me, yeah, as I had talked about earlier. So to hear this, if you've just joined and you'd like to hear this in Spanish, you can click the interpretation button at the bottom and the Spanish option will pop up and you can click on that and join Evelyn and others to hear this presentation in Spanish. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kelly Urich from Forth. Kelly is a program manager where she leads programs to boost electric vehicle adoption and access to shared electric transportation. Her experience at Forth includes managing large federal and state-funded projects with diverse stakeholder groups. Kelly leads Forth's workplace engagement program, as well as the rural car sharing program, CRUSE, C-R-U-S-E. Kelly holds a master's in environmental management and sustainability from Portland State University and a BS from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she also sits on the board of Solar Oregon. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just get ready for Kelly to go ahead and start sharing hers. And in the meantime, I'll have Kate launch a couple of poll questions that Kelly will, oops, go ahead and the poll question still up there. Let's see, there we go. So have Kelly come on and start sharing your screen when you're ready, Kelly.
Yes, just a moment. As I
Yeah.
suspected, my internet is slowing down, so I'm going to go back to having just one monitor up here. Morning, everyone. Let's see. Try this again. Okay. And all right, should be good there. Okay. Well, thanks for participating in the poll. I see we have a majority of people have participated so far. So the first one, have you ever driven an electric vehicle? Got about 50-50 split. And then let's see, do you have or provide access to electric vehicle charging at your workplace? So in this case, we have a majority saying yes, and a couple of people do not. So great. Thanks everyone for participating. You can go ahead and end that poll and close it. Oh, I guess here I can share the results maybe. Kate, and then while you're doing that, I'll just introduce myself a little bit more. Good morning, everyone. As Jennifer mentioned, my name's Kelly Urich. I'm a program manager here at Fourth, and I'll tell you about my organization in just a moment. But also wanted to acknowledge Happy Earth Day. Everyone, thanks for spending your morning with me and with us talking about electric vehicles. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from North Carolina. I grew up in the rural side of Western North Carolina and moved to Oregon back in 2015. So I'm definitely happy to be here. Love Oregon in the springtime. April is my favorite month. So glad to be here with you all this morning. And I think with that, let's just go ahead and dive in. I'm still seeing the poll, but I'm going to X out of it on my own screen. And hopefully.
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly. Sorry about that. I think every co-host has to exit out, I think. So all the little features of Zoom. So yeah.
All right. All clear now. Thank you so much. Okay, so next slide then. All right, so a little bit about my organization. We're a nonprofit trade association based here in Portland. And our mission is to advance the adoption of electric, shared, and smart transportation. We seek to help move both people and goods in a more efficient and cleaner way. And we do that in a few different ways. One is through industry development and networking. So we host conferences and webinars throughout the year to bring stakeholders together across the industry to collaborate and share best practices around how the industry is advancing. We also do a little bit of policy work here in Oregon, as well as up in Washington state, and then we're dipping our toes into federal policy as well. Particularly with the new administration, there's a lot of room for transportation electrification to become centered in some federal policies as well. And then kind of the last two areas are really similar, and that's actually where I spend a bulk of my time. We lead demonstration projects to help demonstrate that new technologies such as electric vehicle car sharing or electric scooter sharing or bike sharing can work in different types of communities and with a variety of stakeholders. And then sort of related to that is this sort of core mission to accelerate market adoption. So we organize events when that is an okay thing to do. Right now, all of our events, of course, are virtual. To educate consumers and stakeholders more broadly about electric vehicles and clean transportation solutions. And so as Jennifer mentioned in the bio, I lead a car share project out in Hood River. And then I'm also leading our efforts around workplace engagement. So excited to be here today talking with all of you. Okay, so just to kind of quickly walk through and set the stage for why workplace charging is really important, or at least Fourth believes it is. Electric mobility in general is, we believe one of the key strategies to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And it's the only sector that has rising emissions consistently year over year. So electric transportation provides the opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because there are zero tailpipe emissions. And I'll get to a few other details on that in a few slides, so maybe I'll just pause there on that point. And then, economics of electric transportation really does make a lot of sense. Yes, the vehicles are more expensive upfront, but over their lifetime, they're much cheaper to operate and have a really stable fuel price as compared to gasoline, which, as we know, tends to go up and down as the market demand shifts and supply rather. And then, as we think about transitioning away from oil for a number of reasons. One really good reason that we like to point out is that it reduces our need to purchase oil from other countries. Electricity, on the other hand, is produced domestically from a diverse selection of energy sources. And then finally, if you have never had the chance to drive an electric vehicle, I encourage you to do so. They're a lot of fun to drive. You have instant torque, and it's, I own an EV now myself, and before I did, I never considered myself a lover of driving or cars or anything, but I do love getting in my electric car and taking it out because it's just incredible, the experience of driving it. Okay, go to my next slide. Or did I already? Yeah, okay. So just to kind of zero in a little bit closer onto the point about EVs being cleaner to drive. So this graph here is kind of the result of research that the Union of Concerned Scientists does and updates on an annual basis that looks at the basically the greenhouse gas emissions associated with gasoline versus electric vehicles. And they're doing so by looking at the electricity grid that makes up the fuel that would power an electric vehicle. So if you just wanted to look at Oregon, a gas car would need to get 102 miles per gallon to be more efficient and less polluting than an electric vehicle that's powered by electricity from our power grid, which, as most of you know, is largely powered by hydropower and in many cases, largely renewable sources of energy. Okay, and then I mentioned this already, but just a really helpful visual. The yellowish line there is showing the price of electricity over time, fairly stable, not really large jumps, as opposed to the price of gasoline over the same period of time. Tends to be very variable and unpredictable in a lot of ways, and higher. So I think we can count on a consistent and lower price of electricity, which I think is a really excellent thing to think about. Speaking from my own experience of driving an EV, I went from paying, $40 or so a month for gasoline to cutting that in half to about $20 in electricity to fuel the same amount of driving. So it's fairly compelling, and it definitely helps to make up the cost over time of that higher upfront purchase. Okay, and then finally, just kind of speaking about the market conditions that we're finding ourselves in, the adoption of electric vehicles in our country as well as worldwide is increasing very rapidly. We're over 1.5 million registered EVs in the country. Of course, that's still a pretty small percentage of the total number of cars on the road. So there's a long way to go before that adoption is more widespread. But as the prices continue to come down as battery costs decrease, which batteries are the most expensive part of the vehicle. So as those costs continue to drop, the prices will continue to come down. More and more automakers are offering electric vehicles and expanding their lines of electric vehicles and committing to being fully electric, in fact. And then along with that, providing longer ranges. And then charging infrastructure, of course, is a really important piece of the puzzle, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But as consumers begin to see more charging stations in their neighborhoods and where they're traveling on highways, that's really convincing them that electric can work for them. And then just generally that helps to grow market awareness. Okay, and I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is just showing some of the recent commitments made by some of the major automakers. And then this slide just is showing, this is a very recent publication of a study that's showing that we're very close, if not already past the point of making it to cost parity for electric vehicles, and it's fully expected by 2024. Okay, so I want to just take a step back now and just get us speaking the same language before I start talking about charging stations and all of that. And we have a fairly split group on exposure to and experience with EVs. So when I'm talking about an electric vehicle, I'm talking about one that has the ability to plug into the electrical grid. And so they come in two varieties, really. One is a fully electric vehicle or battery electric vehicle, which is, most commonly sold electric vehicle in the US is a Tesla. So that's what's pictured there on the left. But then I also just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of plug-in hybrid vehicles out there that still have an electric drivetrain and have the ability to drive only on electricity, depending on the ability to refuel, because they often have a smaller battery paired with a large gas tank. And there's a lot of models out there available now. One that's shown here is the Toyota RAV4 Prime, which came out late last year and is becoming more widely available. But I'm excited for that one. It's a little on the larger side. We're starting to see more plug-in hybrid vehicles, but also battery electric vehicles that meet the needs of larger families and families that like to do more outdoor activities. So exciting for what's coming. But with that, we're going to shift the conversation from vehicles to charging. And just so, again, we're kind of able to speak the same language. I'm mostly going to be focusing on what we call level 1 or level 2 charging today. And really level 2 is what I'm going to be talking about. And this is what the majority of EV drivers are using currently, either at their homes by plugging into a 240 volt outlet, or in public or at the workplace, for example. And so, like I mentioned, it's a 240 volt circuit. So it's a step up from what you might plug into just a standard wall outlet. So it does involve a little bit more electrical infrastructure in place, but it's actually a fairly low lift on the grid in that regard. Okay, I'm going to pause there and maybe just check the chat to see if there are any questions that I should try to address before moving on here. Let me see. Okay, cool. Thanks for engaging about vehicles. I'm super excited to see and get out and see more vehicles hitting the road in the coming months and years. Okay, so why install workplace charging? There are a number of reasons that a business might choose to install workplace charging. Many do it because they have a lot of employees that are asking for it. And that's a really great way to do it. I think often employers might not understand what the demand is for workplace charging. except for what's being asked for. So as we get a little bit further down into the conversation today, I would just encourage you to think about, what kind of surveys, tools do you have in place or available that you're already doing? I see we have someone from DEQ on the call today. So, I know there's the ECO survey that many of you also probably do on an annual basis. So if there's a way to incorporate questions about what types of vehicles people are bringing to the workplace into that, that'll give you a really clear picture on what the demand might be for workplace charging, and to help you, kind of navigate what future build out of infrastructure might look like. So that's, one really key reason is to meet demand that your employees are already expressing, but there are actually a lot of benefits to the employer to do that as well. It really shows that you're a leader and committed to sustainable practices into the environment. There's a lot of studies that have shown that installing workplace charging is actually a way to recruit and retain a really valuable workforce. So that's one thing to think about. Again, it's a little bit more further future looking, but certainly not worth discounting, I guess you could say. And then this last point here, I think there's an opportunity, and maybe we can get into that in the discussion or at a later date offline, but a lot of employers now are thinking about how they might transition their fleets to be electric vehicles. And if there's a way to maximize that investment in infrastructure to be able to serve fleet vehicles, potentially even the public and employees that are driving to work in EVs, then you're really going to lower your total operating costs, not only for your fleet vehicles, but for the investment that you've made for charging. And then I'll just say one more thing before moving on. Workplace charging is a demonstrated strategy for actually increasing EV adoption. So actually seeing chargers in place, seeing their coworkers utilizing them, having the opportunity to ask them like, hey, what is that? What are you doing plugging your car in at work? Really goes a long way to encourage people and see themselves being able to adopt something that maybe they hadn't considered before. Okay, and then this slide is just kind of driving home the point that many employees and future employees of yours are going to be looking to see that you as a company are making really strong commitments and strides in terms of your environmental and social equity practices. Okay, so talking about the employer for a second, I also want to shift and talk about the employee side of it. So right now, of course, we're all working from home. So this is a little bit of a strange concept to think about people consistently driving to the workplace and using that as a place to charge their vehicle. But, workplace charging is the second most likely place for people to charge. And, currently, EV drivers, about 30% of them don't have access to charging at home. That might mean that they have off-street parking and just don't have access to electricity where they park their vehicle. It could also mean, similarly, that they don't have access because they live in multifamily properties or in apartment buildings where there just isn't, there isn't infrastructure set up there. And so being able to charge at work, it's sort of the flip side of charging at home because our cars sit at night and they can charge up there. But then they also sit during the day. And so wherever that sitting during the day happens is an opportunity to be able to provide charging. And there currently our country has a huge deficit of what we believe is needed in terms of workplace charging. This graph or this map is it's a lot to take in, so I won't kind of unpack it right here, but kind of the biggest takeaway is that as of 2017, most metropolitan areas had less than 16% of the workplace charging that we believe is needed to support current adoption levels. And that was in 2017, before the Model 3 came out. The Tesla Model 3 has really just skyrocketed demand for electric vehicles. So I think that, this gap of what's needed for workplace charging is only going to increase. And so, I encourage you to think about what the opportunity is for you to help meet that need. Okay. And now I just want to talk about a program that Fourth has launched recently called EVAL, or Electric Vehicle Adoption Leadership. And I just want to recognize that it's easy to say you would like to install workplace charging. It's a lot more difficult when you go about the process. There are a lot of barriers that employers face, whether it's figuring out what types of chargers they might want, how many chargers they should have, which I spoke about, earlier, as it relates to surveying. But then it gets even more complicated. What policies are you going to put into place for your employees to be able to use the chargers? Do you want to open them up to the public, for example? And then getting, once you have sort of the internal structure of what you want to be able to offer worked out, then it's the installation process that can become a barrier for a lot of employers. Even the most well-intentioned and well set up employers can face the same barriers, whether it's dealing with permitting challenges or finding electricians and contractors to actually do the installation. And then finally, working with your utility to make sure that you actually have the electrical capacity to support the projects that you're wanting to implement. And so recognizing all of that and all those barriers, Fourth created this program to twofold, actually. So one of the reasons that we created it was to help provide resources and technical assistance for employers that are navigating this process. And that's, I think, what I'm here today to really talk more about, and I'll highlight sort of a future opportunity for that in a moment. But then the flip side of it is that, we want to recognize and acknowledge businesses and organizations that have committed to doing this, and we want to be able to celebrate that. So the program is also, it has a certification to it. And as part of the certification, you answer, it's actually a self-certification, and maybe I'll just go and go to the next slide. So there's several different sections within it. And without going into the nuances, I'll just share, that we set it up as a self-certification because we don't want it to become yet another barrier to the process, but you can actually get points for a number of different types of categories. So it may be that you're really strong in another, and the program will kind of help identify that, and as well as provide a roadmap for how to improve on other fronts. So let's say you've done a lot of the pre-work to do surveys and plan for what you want to do, and you're engaging your employees about that. We want to reward you for that, but then also give you the tools you might need to see that plan through on the other side of it. Okay, and I think that's all I want to say on the certification piece. And so part of it, as I mentioned, is providing technical assistance. So Fourth has a number of resources that we can provide to you, as well as some, consulting with you to kind of help you navigate the process. We do host webinars and workshops, and I just want to flag that we're planning to host a workshop to dig into this later this year, probably in July. So if this is something that's really timely for you, and you're interested in learning more, doing more, but don't know where to start, or maybe you want to network with some other employers that have already gone through this process, we're going to set up that space to provide for that. And so I'd love to stay connected with you all and get you signed up for that workshop if that's something that would be interesting. And then, yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And So I think we'll open the floor up for any questions you might have.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. If folks would like to come on, turn on their mic and ask some live questions, you're more than welcome to do that. And or put them in the chat if you would like as well. I think we've got some time here to talk through all the information that you've shared, which was great and super interesting. I too own an EV and was pretty surprised at how fast they go. That torque is for real. But you know, you use more electricity the faster you go. So, and it's easy to go a little faster in those. So anyway, I can, if anybody has a question, I'll turn my mic off and feel free to jump in.
Thank you. If I may, good morning, everyone. Ricardo Palazuelos, Washington County, a colleague of Jennifer is my colleague. But this is on a personal level, a question that I have. I recently attended a technical seminar with auto manufacturers. And despite being a technical talk, a lot of it actually moved into range anxiety. And I'm also, you know, the other thing that came up was as having worked with emergency management is that what happens in the case of a power outage where there is no access to those. We know that there are some places that may have access to it. You know, similarly to ward driving, there may be some homes who are signing up for this. I have a 240 available if you happen to be in the area. But if the power goes out and they don't have a storage unit, that is my thing. Right now we have a hybrid and a regular. The hybrid has proven to be quite surprising to me. But it is actually, the range is pretty good. It is a Pacifica, so it actually, you know, very big, very heavy with all the bells and whistles. So the battery drains out very quickly for my wife. But it has an okay range. The thing that prevents me from moving into a full EV is that I'm looking at the infrastructure that I would need to have in order for me to be able to prevent something like a power outage. You know, as like if I'm power outage on the hybrid, at least I have gas, but on a full EV, like I won't have access. Has Fourth, I also receive your newsletters consistently, but I haven't seen anything that comes like a community effort to have like that storage. You know, like what Tesla is now trying to package is like you get your solar panels, you get your battery, your battery station, whatever they call it, and then you get your plug-in. So is there anything that you know of that is happening in the area so far as perhaps storage available for EVs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. I would say, you know, I think you pointed to the Tesla solution, and there are other companies in the solar space that are working to create solutions for this problem. There's an inverter company called SolarEdge, and they actually sell an inverter that you can install with a solar system, which would allow you, in the event of a power outage. This, of course, assumes that the electric utility is in the loop and on board with all of this. But in the event of a power outage, you could actually utilize the solar directly from your roof or whatever system you might be connected to charge your electric vehicle. So they've set it up so that it can just rather than going into the grid, it would go back into your home, and you could plug into whatever you wanted into that outlet. But I think the idea is for it to be a 240 for an EV. So there are some, I guess, market solutions that are coming out in terms of solving the issue more broadly. I would say, so Fourth is working on a few project concepts. There's a recent federal grant opportunity that has just come out. And so we've been looking to partner with some researchers at Oregon Institute of Technology. This is something that they're interested in exploring. And so I think, you know, we'll definitely be looking for like a demonstration or a pilot project to try to study this. But it's a very valid point. And I would also I have heard, and this was true in the, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the name of the city, but when the tsunami hit Japan several years ago, they were able to restore electricity into the grid about 3 weeks before they were able to restore gas and other, thank you. They were able to restore electricity about 3 weeks before they were able to restore any sort of gas or oil infrastructure. So, that's one example, but I have heard that, the expectation in, if we wanted to think about what sort of emergency we would have here in Oregon, if the big earthquake hit, the expectation would be that electricity is actually going to come back online before, gas stations would be able to offer their fueling again. So it's a great question. The other interesting kind of spin on this is this concept of vehicle to grid technology that is slowly making its way to be more mainstream. Right now, Nissan is one manufacturer that allows for two-way charging. So you can charge up your electric vehicle and then actually discharge it back out to another power source, or like a cell phone, for example, is a really basic example, or a refrigerator. But there are a lot of laws and regulations that kind of get in the way of people doing that on their own. And because of the nature of our industry is moving toward a different charging standard, that being the one that Nissan does not use, called CCS. The standard vehicle to grid or a two-way charging stream. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was a really helpful answer.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, I also see a question in the chat. So do you see PHEV such as RAV4 Prime or other vehicles with a small range as problematic to the full EV future? Yeah, that's a great question. I would say yes and no to that question. I think for a lot of people that we talk to, they're not quite sold on electric vehicles as being a perfect solution for all of their needs. And most people drive very few miles. People actually drive a lot less than they think they do when they're considering purchasing an all-electric vehicle. If you actually look at your weekly driving, it's depending on where you work, it's actually much less than you would think. And the plug-in hybrids allow for anywhere from 20 to even 100 miles in some cases with the BMW, but of electric range before the gas kicks in. And so what we tell people that are sort of in the transition or thinking about trying an electric vehicle that are really worried about the range, that trying a plug-in hybrid is a great option for probably 6 days a week for you. Driving to work, maybe on Saturday you're going out to go to the grocery store, maybe you're going out to a restaurant or out to lunch, and you're really going to survive. That'll be more than sufficient range for just kind of around town light driving. And then maybe that 7th day of the week when you want to drive out to the coast, that's when you either have a gas vehicle or you just take the plug-in hybrid and assume that you'll use the gas tank on the other side of it. On the flip side, I would say the challenge with any sort of vehicle purchase is that it tends to be a very long life cycle for people. So you buy a vehicle and you plan to keep it 5, 10, maybe 20 years, depending on how much you drive and what kind of vehicle you have. So if I'm speaking personally and thinking about today being Earth Day, I think we need to transition to fully electric vehicles a lot more quickly than we are. And having infrastructure in place to support that is a really important piece of the puzzle. So if everyone went out and bought a battery electric vehicle, a fully electric vehicle today, I don't know that there's infrastructure. There is not enough infrastructure to support that type of adoption right now. So, okay, another question from Kate. So do you ever replace the battery on EVs? That's an excellent question. So I mentioned that the battery is actually the most expensive part of the car. And if you were to replace the battery in a fully electric vehicle, depending on how big of a battery it is, you would probably be looking at $5,000 to $7,000, maybe closer to $8,000 or $9,000, depending on how new it was. So it's a big investment to have to replace the battery. However, for all the manufacturers, they have warranties for the battery, and typically it's about 8 years or 100,000 miles. It just depends on the manufacturer. And so that warranty would cover a replacement up until that point. However, the expectation isn't that you would have to replace it in 8 to 10 years. It's just more likely that it won't be as, it won't have the same capacity that it did when you originally purchased it. So let's say you bought a Nissan Leaf today that gets 150 miles. 8 years from now, it might only get 120 miles on a full charge, is an example. And a lot of automakers are starting to make sell refurbished batteries that are about a half to a third of the cost that I quoted a moment ago. So I think hopefully that was a thorough answer to your question. Okay, question in the chat, is work being done on recycling EV batteries? Yes. Thanks for that question, Alex. So yes, I would say I usually have a slide in my deck on this, and I don't today, so that's unfortunate. But there are a couple of different things happening at the same time. One is that in many countries, like China is one example, and Europe, a lot of countries in Europe are starting to do this too. They're making it actually illegal for car batteries to end up in the landfill. And so the automakers who ultimately would receive end-of-life batteries, they aren't able to dispose of them. So they have to find either ways to repurpose them or to recycle them. And I would say many of them are kind of leaning in the repurposing space, which is actually pretty cool. Some of the things that different companies, not the automakers necessarily, but sort of helped funded through the automakers, are doing. Like, for example, I know that they're using them for battery storage, actually. Getting back to the question earlier about resiliency and sort of emergency response. When the battery comes out of your car, and like I sort of alluded to, it's not dead per se. It's just not going to be, maybe not good enough to support a vehicle, but it could still hold a charge and hold energy in it. And so, there's an opportunity to use it as storage for renewables, or I've heard of 7-Elevens actually using recycled EV batteries for refrigeration backup power. So there's a lot going on in that space. And then kind of on the other side of it, one thing that Tesla is doing, they committed pretty early on to not recycle their batteries, but instead they disassemble them. And so they kind of break it back down to the core elements and materials, and then use those materials to build new batteries. So that's another solution that's out there. The other thing to just note is that car batteries are lithium ion currently, lithium ion technology. That's changing to be different, and there's some conversations out there about solid state batteries, but lithium ion batteries are recyclable. There just hasn't been a large market to do so, especially in the US. It's aside from battery recycling for our traditional batteries, like you put into your, remote control. Our typical household batteries are extremely recyclable, and it's just a matter of getting the used products to the recyclers, which is kind of what hasn't quite been worked out yet in the system. Okay, let's see. Biden administration or Biden infrastructure bill, do you anticipate build out and incentives? Yes, excellent question, Barbara. So I didn't talk about any incentives that are available or coming, but one incentive that is currently available is there's a tax credit that is it's federal tax credit for infrastructure specifically, and you can actually, as a business or an individual, claim the tax credit. For businesses, you can qualify for up to 30% off or $30,000, up to $30,000 of your total cost of an installation. So if you want to put in a bank of 10 chargers, say, at your workplace, you could get up to 30% of the total cost off for doing so for the chargers themselves, as well as the cost of installation, which the cost of the installation is actually the more expensive side of it, usually. And if you are a non-taxable entity, that is okay. You can usually claim that tax credit still through the installer or through the charging station companies. They usually can, be a pass-through for that tax credit. So that's something to keep in mind. And then let's see, what was the other thing I was going to, and then as an individual, if you were to install one at your home, you could get up to $1,000 back for the same thing. So for a charger or the installation or both. So that's what's currently in place. And what the infrastructure bill that is coming, or maybe it even came out yesterday, I haven't had a chance to review it if it did. We're expecting a lot of money to invest in EVSE. In fact, I mentioned a DOE, a Department of Energy, federal funding opportunity that Fourth is going to be applying for. One of them is around workplace charging. So we're actually applying for some funding to roll out a workplace charging program. So you may be hearing from me again on that front, but yes, I would say short answer is yes. There is definitely going to be money and incentives coming for the infrastructure itself. On the vehicle side of things, I know there's been some work to either reinstate the tax credit or refresh it. So there's a tax credit available for purchasing EVs up to $7,500 off. Tax credits are not as great as rebates because they're not accessible by a lot of people. You have to have a certain tax liability to be able to access a tax credit. So our hope is, that they can extend that tax credit or even increase or modify it to be more like a rebate. And so there's been questions about how that might change in the coming years, but I haven't really seen anything definite. And then, so for multifamily housing, that's a tough one. I would say there is definitely money coming for it. I would also encourage you to keep an eye on your utility. I know that PGE, whom I'm assuming is the utility for most on this call, PGE is working on a program, and they actually have a program for businesses and their commercial properties, which would include multifamily. But they've kind of put pause on it as they're retooling it a little bit. And I know it'll be an incentive for charging stations specifically, and then they'll have kind of a doubling incentive, if you will, so an extra incentive for I think it'd be low-income individuals that apply and for an individual rebate, and then at the business level for affordable housing, multifamily properties would be qualifying for kind of a double incentive on top of that. So definitely check out PGE. Like I said, I know that they were kind of putting pause on the program that they had and weren't really promoting very much. But I would expect before the end of this year for sure that they would have that out again. Pacific Power, I'm not sure that they have anything active at the moment. But they do, I guess I'll spend less than 1 minute. Both Pacific Power and PGE have grant programs. So I'll put it in the chat, but the PGE has what's called the Drive Change Fund. And then Pacific Power, I think theirs is just called like EV charging or EV. Theirs is very generic. It's something like EV charging grant. But the Drive Change Fund, again, I want to just highlight that more specifically. Thanks, Kate. This is an opportunity for you to apply either as your organization, or you could, if you wanted to partner with Fourth, we would be happy to support, you know, kind of an application development process. But they have direct funding and grants for all types of projects, certainly charging projects and multifamily projects would fall into their sort of criteria. And so I definitely encourage you to check those out. The PGE opportunity opens up on April 30th, the grant does, and I think it is open for about 2 months. And then Pacific Powers will open up later this year.
Great. Wow, that's a lot of really fantastic information and so much potential for the future. It is really interesting to think about, you know, what the Biden administration is talking about, what Oregon is talking about, and just sort of, you know, will the pace keep up? You know, I mean, I still, as a personal EV user, have a difficult time finding charging stations. If I want to go from my home in North Portland to the coast, I have to, you know, really map it out. But so, you know, as more vehicles come out for the consumer, will the charging infrastructure be paced, you know? And I did have one other quick question. With the workplace charging, Kelly, are you seeing most workplaces install the level 2, or are they doing a combination of level 2 and the DC charging? I mean, obviously level 2 would make it so that employees can leave their car there all day, but then you get into issues with everybody kind of wanting to take a turn. And the cost and the amount of electricity use would be big differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in general, workplaces are focusing on level 2 and even, you know, what we call level 1, or just providing a 110 outlet to supplement and be able to provide power to more parking spaces. However, I have seen some workplaces and employers offer DC fast charging. Many of those are companies that are, you know, have public clients as well. So customers coming in that can utilize the charging. So it's not so much a dedicated charging infrastructure for their employees, but they want to, you know, definitely maximize the investment that they made, because the DC fast chargers are very costly, upwards of, you know, $100,000 to get one of those installed. So they're a much bigger investment compared to level 2, and also, I mean, your point about being able to have a higher turnover is valid, and there are other mechanisms and tools that employers can implement to ensure that that turnover happens, even with the level 2 chargers. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, here in the next couple of years, even I'm guessing we're going to see some big changes and added infrastructure.
I hope, I guess, is my, yeah, my hope. All right, well, we are getting close to the end of this presentation, and I just wanted to do a quick wrap up. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know you have tons more info to share. And so as I've mentioned in the previously when we got started here, that I will be sending everyone the presentation and some other links. And so keep an eye out for that. And let's see, am I seeing another question? Got some thank yous coming in. So I just also wanted to touch base really quickly here in the last 2 minutes about the Green Business Leaders Program. And if some of you here on the Zoom are interested in learning more about what we do as a Green Business Leaders Program, we also have a certification. On our certification, there are some practices that involve EV use for your staff, for your site, your organization, what have you. So you can check all that information out on our website, which Kate, I believe, will be putting some links in the chat for that. But I just wanted to say, yeah, another big thank you to Kelly and everybody on the call. But before I do that, let's see, where am I here? Get into my notes. Yeah, I just wanted to mention also that while our Green Business Leaders Program is still fully operational, we do have a little bit of limited outreach, but we are providing resources, recycling bins, posters. You know, it's a shorter time frame. We're dropping off some of those items at kind of a contactless way these days, but we still have lots of resources we can provide, and the certification again is very much up and running. So feel free to reach out if you would like your business or organization to become a green business, certified green business. And so thanks again. So yeah, big thanks to Kelly. Big thanks to everybody for joining us. I know it's a lot of info. I'll follow up. And yeah, get in touch if you would like to have more information about the Green Business Leaders, and you can sign on to receive our bi-monthly Green Business Leaders Bulletin e-newsletter. And I believe Kate has shared that in the chat as well. We're just looking for ways to connect with everybody as much as we can. So have a great day, everyone. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for stopping in, Kelly. Great information.